Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today we have Dr. Steve Russos to present to you on developing and collecting community surveys. He is a tobacco control researcher for local programs and coalitions throughout California. And with no further ado, let's get started so that he has his full time.
Thank you, Vicki. Hi, everybody. Hopefully it's been a great day so far at the conference. So we're going to cover briefly of some simple ideas around prepare and then get data from a community survey. And on the cover here, you see a few different examples. A lot of stuff right now is going online. I think probably all of us at one point or another have taken a survey online. There's also in-person surveys that, you might see people with clipboards around collecting information, whether they're door to door in front of a supermarket or some maybe a health fair. And then I think if you're in class of any kind, you've probably been surveyed in class, either directly by raising your hand or through all kinds of apps that are available now. There's so many different ways of doing surveys. And next slide. There we go. What I thought I'd do is just focus on two ideas. I call them secrets because they're just not really oftentimes well known, but they're so simple. And these two ideas can really help with whatever kind of survey you're doing. It might be a survey of 2 questions on a phone app, or it could be a longer survey that someone has to do more of almost an interview style. But regardless of the survey and the purpose, these two ideas can really help you really get the information that you need. One is start by quote unquote using the survey results before you even have the survey, and trying your hardest not to start by writing the questions. And the second one is to think about your survey takers. And I put be kind to the survey takers. Think about how what it's like to be a survey taker and trying to walk in their shoes. Okay, next slide. Oh, and one up, I think. There we go. There we go. Okay, there we go. So in terms of start by using the survey results, I think a lot of times, we'll find ourselves creating a survey, and then it's not until after we actually finish the survey and we implement it and we get the information we want, we realize, oh my God, we got the wrong information, or we forgot to ask something important. And sometimes we actually get information, but it's frustrating because we might not actually get something that we can use. So, examples sometimes are very simple, like sometimes we want information maybe on a specific zip code, and we don't ask the question, what zip code are you from? Or maybe we want to have a specific characteristic of a person. We want to know, for example, something about how people think about tobacco or certain policy based on their ethnicity or race or income, and we forget to ask that question. And so we end up being frustrated because we don't have the information that we want. Okay, next slide. So it really helps before you even start writing the questions to start thinking about, pretending you actually have the results you want and how you would use them. And that helps you work backwards to figure out if you actually have the survey questions that you want, and if you're asking them in an appropriate way, so you can actually have the results that are going to be most convincing to the people that you want to help. So there's 2 parts of that. One is to think about your end user, and one is to think about their end use, what they're going to do with it. Now, the end users could be many different people, and it doesn't have to be just one end user. Sometimes if you're creating the survey, the end user is you. You want the data because maybe you're planning a certain part of your program or you're planning an event. But sometimes the end user is a coalition member or a policymaker, and you really want to take your time to think about, who is this person? And how are they actually going to benefit from whatever results we're going to share with them from the survey, and work backwards to thinking about what kinds of questions do I ask. Oftentimes we forget that the end users have a lot of other things on their mind, and whatever it is that we're going to present results on is not really what they care about. So Maybe our end users, for examples, are elected officials, or maybe they're retailers. And the results from our survey may not be the top priority of what they're thinking about. They might have something else as a priority. Maybe it's a different topic altogether, like education or business development. Maybe they care about making money or losing money in their community. And so when we present data on tobacco use or tobacco policy, and we don't think about, maybe we should also collect some information about what the end user wants, we might be coming to them with results that may not actually be as meaningful. One thing that's really important about the end users, think about what counts as proof or evidence for them. And if you were thinking about the end user, a lot of times we assume that if we just show people a lot of statistics from our survey, 30% of the people said this or 90% of the people said that, that will be really convincing. The challenge is that that may not be proof for the stakeholder. For the stakeholder who might be a coalition member or a policymaker, they may just want a really cool story about someone in their community that was impacted by tobacco or was impacted by not having a certain policy in place. And that one story could actually make the biggest difference than all the other survey data that you have. So if you don't ask, for example, open-ended questions and you forgot to do that in your survey, and that's actually what counts as proof for the stakeholder, then you'd be missing an important piece. The end use of the survey, there's so many different part of the trick is trying to keep it simple and not conducting one survey to collect information for lots of uses. So you want to think about what's the end use that the person needs this information for? Are they trying to maybe recruit more people for the campaign or recruit more people for the coalition that are diverse or coming from different population groups? Do the end users need data to actually fight opposition to a policy? Or maybe they're trying to figure out information from the survey that could help them with the policy language, like what should we frame this in as? What words do we use to be most convincing? Sometimes people use a survey to assess progress. So after a policy is passed, they want to see, is there still community support? Or maybe they'll pass a policy and they want to think about support for enforcement, like TRL fines or other consequences for businesses or others after the policy is passed. So there's lots of different uses, and you want to think about before you get started, who is my end user and what do they need that information for? I also think about, sometimes we forget about how much time do we have. If you don't have a lot of time to do the survey, let's say someone says, hey, yeah, we need a survey in 1 week, or we need a survey in a few days even, you may not have enough time to think about all these things. And so sometimes it helps just cut to the chase and get what you need and not spend too much time developing the survey, as long as you keep the end user and the end use in mind. All right, next one. Okay, and then now the other secret of being kind to survey takers, and this is really important. I mean, how many times have we been in a situation when someone asks to survey us and we just don't take the survey? Or we'll start a survey and it's too long and then we stop it, right? We're like, oh, this is too long. I don't want to finish the survey. How many more questions do I have? Or we'll skip questions because the questions are too complicated or they don't make sense. So these are some things that get in the way of the survey taker. And so before you actually start writing the questions out and creating your responses, it really helps to think about who is your survey taker and walking in their shoes in terms of how do you, what's going to get in their way. You don't want a survey that's not going to be taken by anybody. You don't want a survey that's going to be started and not completed, or people complaining about how the survey was just not a very fun experience. Next slide. So how can we be kind to survey takers? How do we really walk in their shoes? And this one's a little easier because all of us have probably been survey takers at one point or the other. We've all taken surveys, but here's some things you want to think about when you're creating your survey or even thinking about how you're going to implement it. Reading level is really important. No matter what the age of the population is that you're surveying, you want to think about, can they actually read the questions? Because most likely the survey questions are going to be something that someone has to visually read online or on a paper somehow. And so if the questions are written in too complicated a form or maybe include professional jargon, it's not going to really be understood and people might skip those questions. So you want to think about not just can they read at a 3rd grade level or 4th grade level, but are we using really complicated language? For example, sometimes people don't know what's meant by electronic cigarettes. or maybe they don't know what vaping may mean. So you want to think about what language you use and can your audience understand it. It's really important in many of our communities, if you're thinking about reaching people who don't speak English, to make sure you translate the survey and make sure you're again thinking about not just translating the words, but what the meaning of the words are. Because sometimes, especially when you translate something from English to Spanish, it may not mean the same thing. It's really important to think about the success of taking the survey for privacy. If you ask someone a question that's maybe too confidential, or maybe not, you ask it in the wrong place, how long have you been using tobacco, but now you're asking it in a public setting, they may not want to answer it because they want privacy. Technology has really played a big role in survey taking. So you want to think about your survey taker and what tech do they need. If you're doing pen and pencil paper surveys, do they, if you're out in the field, do they actually have a pen, or do you have a pencil you can let them borrow? If they're on a phone app, a lot of times we assume that people can use phone apps really easily, or computer apps, and that's not always the case. So you want to make sure you test those out. And then definitely, as we get more and more into online social media type surveys, you want to think about, does your audience that you want to survey have Wi-Fi that's stable and you can reach them when you need to? Time is really important, thinking about how long the survey is and how do you keep it brief. And then last but not least, sometimes it helps to have incentives. And oftentimes we think about incentives as money, like, hey, we have to pay people to do a survey. But you want to think about other kinds of incentives, and sometimes just a nice thank you for taking the survey can generate a lot of goodwill for people who can actually tell their friends, and you can get more survey takers. It's really helpful, even if you only have a little bit of time to create a survey, it really helps to do a tiny pilot test or a user test where you have somebody who is a potential real survey user, someone from the community, if they're an elected official, maybe someone from city staff, who can just spend a few minutes looking over your survey to see if it makes sense from their point of view. Because it's hard to walk in everybody's shoes. And so if you can actually find a user or a survey taker who's going to be very similar to what your target audience is, it really helps to get a little bit of feedback from them in terms of, is your survey on track? Does it make sense? Next slide. So there's tons and tons and tons of surveys. So I put a few links here where you can get some examples of existing templates. You want to think about how to make it easier for you to actually, get your survey done. So one way is to start with existing templates and surveys. The Tobacco Control Evaluation Center has tons of public opinion polls, educational surveys, consumer surveys on their site for free, as well as these two other links. So you want to maybe start with something that you can tweak rather than starting from scratch. And then you want to think about, making it easy for yourself in terms of getting help. If you have maybe some experts on your team, or maybe you're near a university who does a lot of surveying and can have a professional kind of help you look things over. Maybe volunteers or friends can help you. When it comes to implementing the survey, a lot of times we don't think about the people who are actually taking the survey. They can be helpful as well. Word of mouth is a really powerful tool to increase the number of people who take your survey. So if you're completing a survey process and you need more people to take your survey, you might ask at the end of your survey, hey, why don't you go ahead and help us? Could you help us recruit some more people to take the survey? All right, next slide. All right, so what is on the survey? This is among the more tough things because you could put so many things on there. I put some of the more common categories of things that we probably want to think about. Personal characteristics, a history of tobacco use, for example, is important to know what, different kinds of experiences people have, and also how they predict what they like and what they support. Knowledge, of course, perceptions of what they believe under your policy, perceptions about what they believe about elected officials and how they want to support certain people. All those things matter in terms of how you measure stuff. Oftentimes the measures are divided into two categories: quantitative, like numbers and statistics, and then qualitative, or stories and comments. And so you want to think about using both types in your survey. Having just one is probably not going to be as effective. And again, as we mentioned earlier, stories and comments and testimonials on your survey, especially if you're having public opinion polls, are really helpful when you're actually summarizing your results for elected officials. Oftentimes, the most common thing on the survey is going to be scales from 1 to 5. How much do you like this? How important is this policy to you? How much would you support this policy to you? So that's oftentimes what we're going to see. Formatting is really important, whether the survey is online or if it's on paper. You really want to think about font size. I don't know how many times many of us will get a survey and the font is so tiny you can't read the words, or sometimes it's just too busy and it's not very attractive or appealing, so you might just not take the survey at all. So you really, it helps to do a little bit of time to think about how you're going to format your survey. So not only do you have the right questions on there, but it actually looks good as well. Next slide. All right, now how do I get the surveys? And this is sort of about the survey where you're going to collect your information. There's 3 areas of things you want to think about here: location, timing, and technology. And location, you want to think about, again, who are your survey takers, the people that matter, and where are they? For example, if you're going to actually you want people to survey people about public opinions at the time that they're shopping at a retailer, you probably want to go during a time when a lot of people are shopping at the retail store. You want to think about how easy it is to access people, where they're going to be doing the behavior that you want to measure. And then you do want to think about things about, are you accessing people in a place that's familiar and safe for them? Increasingly, we think about whether we do the survey online or in person. And especially with the pandemic, a lot of our surveys right now are online. But even with online surveys, you want to think about, when are you going to prompt people? So you might be able to reach them at a time that's going to be most convenient for them. Timing is really important. Are you going to get your surveys in the morning, afternoon? When is it that people are available? And this is just as important for online surveys as it is for print surveys. If you're going to be sending out your survey and you want people to complete it, maybe you do it right after a presentation if you're on Zoom, or maybe you do it right after a certain event when people are still attentive and alert to what the survey may be. Trying to reach people with a survey without a prompt or some kind of an important event can be really hard to do. And then technology, in terms of whether you do it by phone or text or app or in person, again, comes back to thinking about not only who your end user is and how easy it is for them, but you do want to think about how you're going to get the most honest responses. And sometimes we find that with things like apps and online surveys, people have more privacy and they can actually complete the surveys in a little more honest ways. And sometimes, if you're working with a community that's not comfortable working online, it really helps to have it in paper where they may trust that information, or they may trust giving you that information more than if they would if it was as an app. Okay, next one. Oh, cool. All right, so this is where there's not many of us. I think if we could maybe break out Vicky into 2 groups, just a really brief breakout, maybe we'll do 10 minutes at the most with this, to give you some practice thinking about these ideas, the end user, what kinds of questions you would ask. So you want to think about this scenario. We have a campus with 15,000 students, and they've adopted a tobacco-free campus policy. The policy prohibits all, but they're finding out that people are still using tobacco on campus. There's tobacco litter, there's signs of vaping. And so the student body government asked you to create a survey, and they want to know 2 things: student recommendations for more realistic solutions to enforce the policy. And they also want to get a sense of level of support that students will have about fines and penalties for tobacco use on campus. So during the breakout, we're looking for folks to just come back with 3 things. Just one important decision maker. Who's going to be one of the more important decision makers for your results? And then what results are going to motivate that decision maker to take some action? So knowing we want recommendations for implementing and enforcing tobacco-free campus policy, who is the decision maker, and what results from the survey are going to motivate them to actually take action? And then lastly, how might you do some things to create or implement the survey that are going to get results that are more accurate and believable for your decision maker? So those are the 3 things: decision maker, what's going to motivate them, and what's going to make the results more accurate and believable. Should we try breaking out?
They should have all gotten a request. Castaneda, can you hear me? Were you not able to get into your room? Daisy?
All right. Cool. I learned some new things. That was great. So let's briefly kind of debrief. I definitely got some new ideas that I was not expecting. So I'm thankful for our breakout. Um, uh, see, does someone from I see Brandon or Miriam? Does someone want to comment on your breakout and sort of what you got out of it? What were some of the key ideas? Or whoever was in the other breakout. Oh, Miriam's saying something in the text. Okay, in the chat. So key ideas were policymakers. We want to talk to the city council members. Okay. Alex, do you feel comfortable kind of sharing some of your ideas because you're doing this live? That was kind of really nice for us.
Yeah, definitely. So, we talked a lot about enforcement and how enforcement is a very difficult thing. One of the things that we've done is the penalty, so to speak, for if you are caught breaking the policy is you'll have the option to either participate in some cessation counseling at the wellness center, or complete an online tobacco health education activity. And so you know, as far as enforcement goes, I think the biggest thing that we're doing is just putting a lot of signage out, knowing that to a large degree, we're going to kind of depend on people to self-enforce and the policy and kind of police themselves.
Right. I thought it was kind of good to sort of thinking about the balance of who the decision makers are and having thinking about the decision makers being students, maybe student government or other students who are going to be coming up with enforcement ideas. But then also maybe, I think you mentioned like you had a nurse on your campus that was part of the decision making body. Is that right?
Yeah. The head of the nursing program on campus was all about it. So I thought, it helps to have like a health expert.
Right. Someone who's maybe higher up, but sort of in the health field as opposed to just administrative.
Yeah.
Ideas from anyone else, kind of what you got from this, any questions that came out of it? Yeah, and enforcement definitely getting, assuming whatever policy you're going to be working on, it doesn't hurt to think about now if you're doing, for example, community surveys that are about the support for a specific policy, definitely think about how you might break up your questions to ask questions that are specific about support for enforcement. A lot of times, when we ask the survey questions, we might ask the questions and we lump everything into one question. Would you support a policy that prevents the sale of tobacco products and enforces it in some way? And it's really good if you could break it out into a couple of things, as opposed, and keep enforcement as a separate topic and see how people feel about it. Let's go to the next slide before we close. So this is one of my more favorite measurement quotes as someone who does research and tries to measure everything. That a lot of times we have all these cool tools, and especially now, there's so many great gadgets for measuring things directly, indirectly, through surveys. And it's really hard sometimes just to see like what's right in front of us. And so you want to think about, as you're doing your survey, what really matters? Who are the people that matter? Who are we going to share the results with? And what matters to them in terms of the kinds of information and data that they're going to believe and try to act on. I left my contact information there. If any of you are doing surveys and you want some feedback, don't hesitate. I do this stuff, 24 hours a day. Sometimes it feels like there's always a survey happening in my life. And so if you want some feedback on your surveys, don't hesitate to send me a note and I'd be glad to help. And with that, I'll just leave it open to any other comments or questions from anyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Russos. We really appreciate you being here today with this great information. We will stay on for another 3 minutes for any questions you might have, but please make sure you go back to your Whova and go back to the general session. There will be a chance to get a gift card, but we really would like to do a closing activities after this. But we've got 2 more minutes left if you have any questions. And remember, this information that he went over today will be something that your coalition, if you choose to do a survey, can use as information. There's activity sheet in the resources part on Whova that goes with the community survey, as well as his slides that were here today. His presentation is also within those resources as well. So all of this is packaged there.
Super, and definitely the link to the TCEC evaluation resources. It would really be a shame if you didn't start with something that people have already created. There are really tons of surveys there. So I encourage people to go to that part.
So you can access to his presentations because that's on one of his slides. So yes, definitely start with something that someone's already done.
Vicky, is there an evaluation survey as the conference too? Are you using
I
surveys?
believe so. I wasn't in charge of that, so I'm not sure how they were going to do it. I don't know if they're doing polling or how they're going to do it, but you are right. And once they're gone, it's hard to get people to go back to the survey. So
It's been so hard with COVID to get surveys done. I mean, it's really,
it is. It is.
I don't know if there's anyone on right now that has done any Facebook surveys, like through Facebook or social media. I mean, those can be clever, and we've had some success there, but I'm not sure if anyone's tried those.
I just had a quick question. Thank you so much for your presentation, Vicky or Steve, and also for like hosting this, Vicky. But also, so my question is like, what is some of the hardest ways that like you had to deal with like collecting your survey results and processing them?
Yeah, I mean, for collecting the survey results, the hardest thing is really in terms of being at the right place at the right time. It sounds so stupid and trivial sometimes, like, you know, location, right place, right time, but really thinking about where are the people I need and how do I get them. So if I need people for something around shopping, am I where they're shopping? Like, is that where I'm going to be? If we get out on the workshops, if we're doing a workshop, can we get them right after the workshop? So location and timing is critical. Otherwise, it's not just difficult, you just get no surveys. I mean, there's nothing to analyze. And then for analysis, I mean, really thinking ahead of time of what the results are going to be. Because in many ways, when you're creating your survey, whether you like it or not, you're creating your analysis plan. And so really thinking about, you know, do I want people to answer only one item or multiple items? And how am I going to break that apart later and run those numbers and create those graphs? That can be a real pain in the butt if you don't think about it in advance. It really helps to think about what your report's going to look like at the end and then work backwards in terms of what questions you're going to ask. It just saves you hours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Russos. Appreciate it. Okay, everyone, go back to Huba. Go back to,
Bye.
and thank you again so much for presenting.
Bye.
Bye-bye.